Alrighty. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Ibbaka's final webinar session of the year 2025. Can't believe it's already Christmas in basically 2 weeks. And once again, Michael Mansard has graciously let us invite him and join us for the final webinar of the year. We've got Stephen Forth as well from Ibbaka and Value IQ. And this session today is why every SaaS app and agent needs a value model. You'll probably see in the email and the calendar invite, we did not add in agent until just recently because we were kind of going through even just the title and just refreshing it because we said, before, why you should, but we thought, you know, why every SaaS app and agent definitely needs a value model. So yeah, plug in any comments you have where you are coming in from. Q&A is open. So is the chat. So feel free to throw in anything you like. If we do have time at the end of the session, like usual, we can answer those questions. Post webinar, we'll quickly edit this video, send it to everyone's inbox. You'll get the video link to our YouTube channel as well as the presentation deck that you're seeing right now. And yeah, so Stephen and Michael, please go ahead and just have a little intro. Mike, you can go first this time if you like.
Sure. Hey, Michael, based out of Paris. I head what we call the Subscribe Institute at Zuora. It's our internal think tank. We're lucky to have thousands of clients and more than $100 billion worth of data. So I happily go to clients and share hopefully some great leading practices. I've had the chance to be engaged with more than 400 recurring revenue models companies, across industries, globe and size. I've actually sold the business back in the day and invested in more than 20. So I say it every single time, I think, but I will say it again. I'm a monetization, value selling, pricing nerd.
Great. And Stephen Forth, and as Liam said, thank you, Michael. We really appreciate the collaboration. Uh, I am one of the co-founders of Ibbaka and a co-founder and principal in Value IQ, an AI company that is focused on building agents to help people with value-based selling, value-based pricing, and all the other components that go into a AI native pricing strategy. Um, and I'll just quickly note here that uh, we are very grateful to Michael because his Compass framework, which is something we are going to look at today, is one of the key inputs into the Value IQ pricing intelligence agent, which will be going commercially live this week. In other words, later today or early tomorrow. But again, complete pricing geek, deeply steeped in value. And we're going to have a really great session to end off the year. We're going to start with the topic for this webinar, which is why value models are so important to the commercialization, monetization, and pricing of AI applications and agents. We are going to go on, though, to sort of signal some of the things that we think may be coming in 2026. Michael and I will be collaborating on the value attribution problem. That's one of our big themes for next year. And we're going to be asking people here what are the main themes that they're looking for and are concerned with in 2026. Before we dive in, though, let's just ask a simple question of people. Do you have a formal value model? So Michael and I are not allowed to, as panelists, we don't get to vote. So I will just note that we are in the process of building our value model generator directly into our agents. So our first agent, the pricing intelligence agent, does not yet use our value model generation agent, but it will do so within the next month or so. So I think that we are working on yes, connected to our software through an API is where where we are. Michael, can you speak for Zuora at all? Does Zuora have a formal value model connected to Zuora's applications? I know Zuora has lots of different applications, so there's probably different answers depending on which part of Zuora you're talking about.
Absolutely. So what I can tell you for a fact is when I joined Zuora in the early days, I actually built one of the first value models, by the way, that we used across a good 40 deals at least. And it was in a very advanced tool that's called Google Sheets. So very, very shiny tool, joke aside. But then we had a formal value engineer, Chris, that joined the company. He's a brilliant guy. And he actually rely on a dedicated value solution. And now is adding a lot of AI layers on top of it. I don't know in detail to what extent it's connected. I know there's some level of connectivity, but not to the extent of what we're going to be discussing today, which is a bit more, let's say, exploratory today. I mean, it exists, but it's still early stage. Let's say it's nascent.
Okay, and I notice in the chat that Mark Stiving, and for those of you who don't know Mark, he's one of the key people in the global pricing community and has a tremendously good podcast on his site Impact Pricing. And I know he's trying to poke me here. I almost wish we could bring him on so I could say, ask Mark, what is a value model? But I'm going to answer the question quickly. And so a value model is I'm going to give a technical answer. A value model is a set of equations that estimates the value that a solution provides to a specific customer or set of customers. And it's easiest to think of a value model as answering the question, what impact does your solution have on the profit and loss statement of your customer? Does it help them increase revenue? Does it help them decrease costs? Does it reduce risk? Does it reduce operating capital requirements? Does it reduce or defer capital investment requirements? Does it give the ability to generate more options? But the key thing here is that it can't be vague hand-waving statements. It has to be formalized in a way that it can be tracked and addressed. But I think Michael's going to give us his point of view. But Mark, I wanted you to acknowledge the question and try to give an answer.
I'm going to end the poll now, guys. You ready?
Yep. So, it's not surprising that most value models live in spreadsheets, and that a few live in the CRM or CPQ. CPQ is configure price quote, or value management or ROI calculator. There is one lonely fellow or he or she out there who actually has it connected to their software through APIs. I think that's probably the future, but let's go on and hear what Michael has to say about this.
Um, but I'm fully in line. Probably I'd suggest that I could share, as we move on. But what I would like to share maybe as introductory, words, if you'd agree, is probably the first 5-10 minutes of the webinar, maybe a couple new things for a couple people in the room. But I would say it's going to be more like a summary of why we need value models. But I think, let's say the rest of the webinar, we're going to probably be sharing things that I've never seen shared anywhere else. If you'd agree, Stephen.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that
so, so,
sounds good.
so, so so
Yeah.
maybe I'd move forward, so I leave a bit of space to actually show the innovative part. But what you said, I fully agree. Spreadsheet, I'd say, is what I see as the most common things in companies, and the most advanced ones do have, let's say, fit for purpose solutions. API, I would say it's a handful of companies that I've seen. Like I could count them on one hand, to be honest.
But that in part, Michael, is the fault of the people providing value model software is that they have not provided APIs. I mean,
Agreed.
if you wanted to do this, it's not necessarily simple and straightforward today. And perhaps that's one of the things that needs to change for 2026.
Absolutely.
Go on, Michael.
So maybe set the stage. a little bit about, why we're having this conversation in the first place. So, by the way, I was recently invited by a gentleman, I think in the room, by the way, called Brendan Hughes. I'll spell it, by the way. He invited me to one of his group, very interesting group in Europe from CROs, and I think a bit beyond CROs. And I kind of discussed the exact same thing. So, why do we think, by the way, that now is the moment for value models and what they're gonna spread like wildfire? Uh, you know, essentially, you know, I think we all start to see that what we've been discussing for the past 2 years, Stephen, right, is happening under our very eyes, which is there's tremendous value, at least for some very clear use case in AI. Customer service is a clear one. 60% of tickets being resolved automatically, right? Cost roughly $2 per resolution. We discussed also legal. Now you needed, I don't know how many lawyers to go through 2,000 pages to form an opinion, and now you can get that opinion in less than 20 minutes. So that doesn't fly any longer. You cannot use the old script. The old script, for decades was, I'm gonna monetize seats, and I'm going to monetize features. I'm gonna gate the features, and you're gonna pay depending on what features you want and how many seats you want for those features. Essentially, you sold the tools. The user did the work, and that worked. But now the work and the outcome is being driven, produced by the agents. And again, that changes pretty much everything. And as we'll discuss in a minute, we've seen two movements essentially. One movement early on was, we understand that, but we're gonna have to keep the old model, even though it's gonna break, because it won't cover probably the cost of inference. And we discussed that in many webinars. Every time you use AI to resolve a ticket, to form an opinion on the 2,000-page, set of documents, it costs you, and it grows linearly, right? So if you sell per user, you're not gonna cover your cost, and the more the user is gonna use it, the worse your margin is going to get. And of course, the realization of the value, 60% of tickets being resolved, is going to lead to less users. So less revenues and less margins. We've discussed that many, many times. So all I'm trying to tell you here is the model is being broken. And back in the day, some stayed with the old model, even though they knew hopefully it would break. And a lot of people would claim that outcome-based was the future. And I think that was the starting point, and where we get, and we had many discussions with Stephen, and that's where also we created this compass framework, is to show that there's a spectrum in between. And that spectrum, I don't know if maybe it's on the next slide, just to show it visually. That spectrum, in fact, told us that there's 4 ways essentially to monetize AI. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that in terms of metrics. You can monetize per agent, which is equivalent to a salary. So Sintra, for example, they charge you virtual agents $39 per month. You can charge per activity, which is almost like a consultant. You pay per hour. Hypocritic AI, it's a virtual nurse hour, essentially, that you're buying. You can buy the output, which is essentially, piecework that you're buying, or deliverables. And that's the equivalent of a usage-based business process outsourcing. Think of your pay slips when you buy from your HR provider. They're going to charge you every time they issue a payslip. That exists in AI. That's Agentforce today, $2 per conversation or 10 cents per actions, or per outcome. And again, that's a minority of cases. And you typically take a percentage of the cost savings or of the revenue generate, or you pay per resolution, which is a smaller outcome, yet but still an outcome in customer service. Right now, about 70%, 70, of the market is activity or output. So selling hours or selling deliverables, essentially. And when we created that matrix with Stephen, and we thought, about, how to navigate it, you can see that there's really 2 dimensions, which we won't describe probably now. Probably not, now is not a good time, and we can refer to the articles. You are navigating on that matrix based on the scope of work of the agents, which means that the more your agent goes and leans toward goal achievement, the more the richer it is, right? And the second dimension being essentially what I call here the level of attributability, or think of it as attribution. Can I claim and can I demonstrate that value? And essentially, the more you go to the right and the more you go up, the more you can get towards charging per outcome. Otherwise, it would be a catastrophe. You would never be able to actually charge. So we have a larger model with roughly 14 questions to help you assess what is the right metric within the spectrum in which you may want to be playing using that matrix. But the key topic I want to start opening here, right, and then probably passing the baton to Stephen, is the fact that the two dimensions that were very discriminatory in order to decide at a high level in which part of the spectrum you should be playing, agent, activity, output, outcome, is the scope of work of the agent and attribution. But guess what? Attribution is, of course, something which is a result of what you do, but it's also a function of perception and demonstration to your clients. You could be creating amazing outcomes, but your customer may never know. So, of course, let's use a very practical example that we all know from our companies. Sales reps are really good at getting direct attribution because they're directly working on a deal. But sometimes marketing teams have a really hard time demonstrating attribution. Just think of the massive fight that we always see between marketing QL and SQLs, right? Between the different teams. So that's a real life illustration about attribution. It doesn't mean you don't create the value, but even if you create that value, do you really demonstrate it? And that's what opened, let's say, the floodgate of, sure, so it's going to become an attribution battle. And going back to basic, the first way to demonstrate attribution is to actually model the value. So I'll pass the baton to you, Stephen, but I would say for me, that was the stage setting, if that makes sense.
No, that I think that really helps, Michael. Because one of the things that we've seen in 2025 is a very rapid evolution in pricing models. So I was just looking back to one of our most popular blog posts from back in October of 2024 about the evolution of AI pricing models. And I have to say, I think back in 2024, we kind of missed the boat. And one of the reasons we missed the boat is we didn't have the compass model to work from, and we didn't have the sort of frameworks and context to think about how AI pricing was going to evolve. Uh, but if you look at the y-axis here, the attribution axis, can you really claim that your solution was responsible for or contributed to the value that you're claiming? This, I think, is going to be one of the critical questions for all of us in 2026. It's one of the things that we are going to be looking to agents to answer for us. And because we need to be able to do this, it's the reason that value models are going to be either embedded or connected into applications and agents going forward.
So
So
this,
this y-axis here is, I think, one that has been overlooked in a lot of pricing work over the last couple of decades, and that is changing and needs to change more and faster. But we're going to talk about that a bit more before the end of the session. So why don't we go on to the next point? So I'll just quickly speak to this. Mark asked this question earlier, but a value model is an equation, or it's a set of equations. It's not just vague hand waving and marketing statements. And it's the bridge between technical metrics, whatever those are for your application, and the economic outcomes. So the value model is the thing that connects those two things together. And one of the big things that's changing because of generative AI is that value models and value are seen to be probabilistic, not deterministic. What do we mean by that? So in earlier versions of software and earlier ways of thinking, we wanted to claim direct causal relationships. So if A, then B. Or for those of you who are coders, if else, if X, else kinds of statements. The world that we are, I can't even say moving into, the world we live in today is one that is based a lot more on probabilities and Bayesian ways of understanding the world. And that needs to get coded into our applications and into how we we think. So just quickly to see, it can help to see what we mean. So this is an example of a value model that is actually built into the valueIQ.ai sales coach. This is an agent that will be going into commercial availability before the end of this year. And basically, what this allows you to do is it takes all of the information that you can provide about your product or solution and all the information that you have about your target customer or your customer, combines these together using a set of fairly sophisticated AIs to generate a value model and to provide you with all of the data that justifies the value model. Now, this still does not answer the attribution question, but it actually gives everyone a way to rapidly create a value model and to apply it to a specific opportunity or customer. And this is for Gong, everyone's favorite sales enablement tool. And one of the key value drivers that Gong claims is increased rep productivity. So sales reps are more productive before they use Gong. And we have here the equation that it can be used to justify this. And Gong is getting better and better at actually providing the data that informs this equation. So they track the impact that Gong has on the sales process. So sometimes value models sound like abstract things, but in fact they're very, very concrete, practical things that impact decisions that are taken every day. And I think, Michael, let's go on and talk a little bit more about value models in the life cycle.
Absolutely. I think we should make it very interactive, but if I go from what we just discussed, Stephen, which is interesting, is we do have, and that's a fact, and you mentioned it, right, an explosion of pricing models and pricing metrics. And we've seen that, in the past 2 years, I've seen more changes since the start of my career. So it's a whirlwind, which is great. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of the buyers, for the buyers, it's going to become really hard because, when we're only buying seats, and features, of course, there's differences. But for me as a buyer, it's very easy to compare two vendors. Now, it's becoming really complicated. What's your definition of credits if you're using credits? Do you do rollovers? What happens? So all the and we've seen at least 30 to 40 different metrics. And I've studied about 150, 160 companies this past years. So that makes it really hard for the buyer. So what we're discussing now, before we just jump on the slide, is that, in my view, the ability to demonstrate value and outcomes, even if you don't charge the outcome, but just the activity or the outputs, is a matter of survival. You may have seen that the churn and the net retention rate is not very rosy for all AI companies. So imagine now you're unable to demonstrate that value, and you might be creating a lot of value. You're going to get kicked out, or your AI solution is going to get kicked out from your clients. So for me, really what we're talking about now is a matter of survival. So if we follow the money, right, let's say, that's what I see on the slide, you could start putting, of course, value models, which is what we've seen for a very long time, to actually help you design pricing and packaging. Very often, a value model is a way to actually assess the value of features and help you bundling and help you design packages. Then the second place where we use it probably the most by far, in fact, is sales. So we tend to actually create, for often the largest and the most complex deals, we tend to actually create value models, or at least implement value models to justify the value of a deal. And then, the deal goes, and we never revisit, by the way, that business case. I would say it's the vast majority of companies that I've worked for, but those that already do it show some maturity in terms of understanding value. Then you go one level, after that. Let's say sometimes, it's not on the slide, right? But it's kind of like the end, but sometimes we may be doing value realization study to show that what we promised has been realized. That's, let's say, for a very, very small amount of companies. But what you don't really see, by the way, is justifying invoicing. And think of it from what I just discussed. If you are starting to invoice based on value, you have to justify the work and the outcome that your agent is delivering, regardless of what you're doing, just in order to be able to claim not just the value, but to claim the value on the invoice that you're sending to your customers. So that's why, and that was the discussion we had with Stephen, my strong convictions is that value models are going to become a product, by the way, and a product that is going to be a feature embedded directly in your tools. So the value model will be front and center of your solution, and the users should be able to actually see how much value you have been co-creating. And that is going to be the source of iteration, because based on the value you create, you're going to be able to extract a lot of information, such as, is the value consistent between customer segments? And if there's differences of value, by the way, between customer segments or customers, sorry, maybe it's a very strong signal that you may need to actually resegment and change pricing packaging. So I don't know if that helps describe, and probably, Stephen, you have a lot more to add, but I would say back in the day and until now, value modeling was really used on a subset of processes and sometimes on a subset of deals, and very often on the front end of let's say the revenue footprint. But I think it's going to be living throughout, and it's going to have to source the data directly from the product and not be probabilistic, as you mentioned.
Yeah, Mike, I was on a webinar yesterday with the head of growth for Lovable. Lovable is one of the vibe coding apps that many people are using, including ourselves. And she had a very interesting comment. She said that in the AI and vibe coding world, if you think you've found product market fit, you're wrong, because everything is evolving so quickly. So that even if you have product market fit today, you don't necessarily have product market fit tomorrow. And this is a big change, right? If you think of the traditional SaaS approach, it's you develop a solution, you iterate it, you work with users until you get product market fit, and then once you have product market fit, then you change gears and you move into growth mode. What she's saying, which was super interesting, is that in Lovable's case, and they're at over 200 million in ARR now. She doesn't think of them as having product market fit, because product market fit is a constantly moving target. So if that is the case, and she made a pretty good good argument for it, then the value model as well has to be something that is dynamic and continually evolving. And this statement that you have at the bottom of this slide, Michael, I found really, really important. There's two really important points here, right? The value model is a living creature. 2 or 3 years ago, you had a value model, you developed it, you researched it, you validated it, and then it was seen as something that was set. But now, in the world we live in today, we have to see the value model as something that is evolving, not just as the product evolves, but also as the market evolves and as your competitors evolve. And that's making value models something that are first order things in their own right. In the past, they were sort of pushed under the water surface. They were there. Some people were using them very effectively, but they weren't something that was highly visible. In the world we're moving into, the value model is going to be a living, evolving thing that needs to be managed as a product. And I think the thing that really caught my eye on this slide is this transparency box. Which makes me want to ask how Zuora is going to be incorporating value models to help its customers justify their invoicing. But I won't put you on the spot because we've got a lot of other things to discuss.
So I know we're working on it specifically for agents, by the way. So no doubts about that. What I want to add to what you just said, which may sound logical, but why in the past, by the way, did we just ring fence the application of value models, for the largest deals or only for the front end of the process? It's very often because of the costs and the effort. It take a lot of time, effort. Of course, having a solution and a culture can help you do it on 100% of deals. Having a very strong customer success team can help you do the value realization study. But frankly, it's hard. So we just said that AI is the catalyst that forces you to have value models. But the good news is also AI is the ingredient that makes continuous value models and turn them into value creators, as you said, Stephen. AI is really strong actually at helping you assessing, creating, and iterating on the value model. Because at the end of the day, I don't know what's the number, I'm sure you know, Stephen, but probably between 40 and 60 value drivers, you should might be able to model any business. Of course, then you have to make them specific, but there's almost like a finite set of value drivers that we know of. And then it's just a matter of, adapting the name, changing, and being very creative and mapping. So there's a lot of complexity behind that. But what I'm trying to tell you is AI is really good at doing this kind of mapping by, leveraging a lot of documents you have, from customer interviews, how your customers use the tool, your products, reading from what people say on your competitors and on you. So long story short, what I'm trying to tell you is why we never did that before is because we were constrained by the human workload to do these value models and execute. And now AI is helping us to do it at scale and connect to the core systems. I think we have some questions, by the way.
I have more comments, and some of them are
Okay,
about stuff that we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes.
brilliant.
So yeah, I would say, Michael, that it's more the 80/20 rule,
Yep.
that 20% of the value drivers account for 80% of the value. And in fact, when I was working on Leverage Point with Ed Arnold, one of the first things that Ed did was to survey a group of about 2,000 value drivers that had been collected by SPG, the Strategic Pricing Group, which had been Tom Nagel's company, which had been acquired by Monitor, where Ed and I were working. And he boiled them down into a more coherent set of 6 types of value drivers. And that, in fact, underlies the approach that we're taking at valueIQ. So, and yes, the generative AI and the ability to connect generative AI models with other kinds of more formal mathematical models has completely changed how we think about this problem. And I just want to go back to what Michael has said. I think it's fair to say that I have seen more change in the past 12 months than I saw in the preceding 35 odd years that I've been working in tech. The change has just been enormous, and as William Gibson, the Vancouver-based science fiction writer, said, uh, "The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed." But let's go on. So now we're going to get into the crux of it. So value models are great, but I just wanted to relay a couple of anecdotes. So some years ago, I was selling a value management system to a very large U.S. industrial company, Parker Hannifin, and the guy, the and the chief pricing officer, I think that was his title, Dick's title, was very, very, very much wanted to buy this. But the CTO said, you guys, you come in here and you make all these claims about value, but it's not your application that's creating the value. It's all the hard work that my team and Dick's team does using your application that really creates the value. So there's no way I'm going to give you credit for all the value you're claiming, because it's really our hard work that generates the value. And then more recently, I was helping one of our customers communicate its value to a cynical chief revenue officer. And this CRO said, if every one of you companies that comes and sells to me made good on your claims, my revenue would go up from 170 million to 1.7 billion overnight. And I know that's not going to happen. So we're moving in, and both of these are fair comments, right? The value is not just well, in the past, before the AI systems, the value was not primarily created by the software. It was created by the people using the software, which was Michael's earlier point. And the second thing is we have today lots of overlapping and conflicting value claims that we could ignore because we were really only cared about our solution. But as we move into multi-agent systems, we're not going to be able to continue to ignore the value attribution challenge. So Mark, I think, was asking about this earlier in the conversation. But Michael, what do you see as the value attribution challenge?
So, this is, and I think you mentioned it, the future is already here today. Today, all the elements, all the ingredients, to start cooking multi-agent system is here. So when we say multi-agent, it could be your own agents collaborating with one another, or it could be multiple agents from multiple vendors. Now the question is, these different vendors may have different models. You'll have to have some harmonization. And the question is, exactly to your point, who gets credit? So before the problem was the human versus your software. Now you have different agents collaborating to an outcome as part of a workflow. Who gets paid? By the way, what happens if agent A hallucinates, agent B fixes it, agent C closed the deal? Who gets paid? Does agent A gets paid, right? So I would say this is the value attribution problem, and it's going to be an extremely prevalent thing we're going to discuss. So right now, no one talks about it, to be honest. So that's why I mentioned the importance before about the fact that you need now to actually start thinking about having a built-in feature in your software to start thinking about what happens when it becomes collaborative. You have to start thinking as a provider or even as a buyer, and similar to a human system, how do you ensure that the agents together collaborate to maximize a given outcome and prevent center behavior? Because you could have an agent that actually does something to optimize its own outcome, but which actually does not optimize the overall outcome. So think of it a bit like, I would call it almost like the three laws of robotics, from Asimov, but apply to value. Should you have rules, making sure that all the agent works collectively to get the same outcome? And last, is there going to be a standardized value protocol where the agents actually are going to bid for work based on a promised value and be paid based on realized value and its attribution? So to answer your question, Stephen, I think it's becoming a real problem in terms of modeling, in terms of collaboration, in terms of harmonization. So right now we have protocols for communication, we have protocols for discovery, we have protocols for anything with agents. We don't have protocols for value. And I think that's going to be a big thing because people are going to have to get paid.
Yeah. So, Michael, it had never occurred to me to apply Asimov's three laws of robotics to this problem. That's a super interesting idea. Let's just think through that for a moment. So let's see if we remember what the three laws of robotics are. So do you have them handy, Michael, or should I try to dredge them out of my memory? I'm going to try to dredge them out of my memory at the risk of embarrassing myself.
That's a trap. And I think the first one, I'm not going to make a mistake. It's about not hurting human
Yeah,
by any inaction, so by action or inaction.
I think the action or inaction is the second one.
Yep.
So I think the first one is that a robot will do no harm to a human.
Yep.
And then the second one is through a robot will not allow harm to come to a human through inaction. And then the third one is that the robot needs to preserve itself.
And I think there's something about
Uh,
obey any instruction.
Mark put them in. Thank you. Did I get it in right?
There's something about
Oh, yeah. Okay, no, I did
instructions.
not. Yeah, following orders. Thank you, Mark. So I think there is an interesting way that we could think about putting, so how do the Michael Mansard's three laws of agent attribution, what are they going to be? And I think has to start with an agent will collaborate with other agents in creating value.
Yeah, based on the outcome defined by a human.
Yeah, something like that. This
Yep.
is not how we think. I shouldn't speak for everyone. I'm sure there are some people that think this way. But most of us, when we are developing agents and taking them to market, we are not thinking about how does my agent help other agents create even more value for the customer. And that's a sort of shift in thought process that we're going to need to do. Michael, do you have some ideas on how we can start working on solving the attribution problem? Because I agree with you. I've been aware of the attribution problem. Value IQ's value drivers actually have a slider where you can slide it to say how much of the value that's being claimed you want to attribute to your application. But slider is a very simplistic approach, and we need a much more rigorous approach in these multi-agent system environments that we're moving into.
Uh, I would say fully agreed. The Let me try to kind of use parallels to answer your question because there's precedents. The first precedent I would say is the classic marketing attribution, especially when you do advertising, when you have a marketing mix and you want to check how you do it. So well, let's say the first step you have to do, I think it's obvious, is to have a value model. If you don't have one, let's say that's the first step. This one, there's no way around it. The rest we're going to discuss is more futuristic. I think we discussed it. I don't believe that a rule-based attribution system is going to work. So what's rule-based? You probably guys know it. There's something called, for example, first touch or last touch or whatever attribution in which you actually give credit to the first or the last action within a chain. That is not going to fly because that means some people will not get paid, or maybe it would fly for a very small amount of stuff. Some are like multi-touch. You may have heard about time decay. Depending on where you are on the value chain, you get more or less. I don't believe it's going to work. So the only way to make it work is to make it algorithmic. Algorithmic means that there's a probabilistic or statistical approach. And what are you going to have? I would say the ones I know as candidate, and I know you're probably going to disagree on this one, Stephen, or probably add more. I would say for me, the most intelligent one might be around game theory. So in game theory, you got something called Shapley value, for example, which calculates payouts amongst players. And the idea, and it goes back to the point I made before, you want to maximize the outcome and all agents should work together. And Shapley has been designed to actually create coalitions. And you actually spread depending on the payouts. So it's fairly distributed based on the value, right? So that's exactly what we do in marketing when you have different marketing touch points, for example, in a company, and you want to allocate the different marketing channels or the different marketing tools that have been used throughout the journey. So think of it, maybe you need 16 touch points to set a B2B deal today, and you want to allocate the marketing budget versus content versus a BDR call, and you want to make sure that you don't spread like butter, and you want to make sure that it feels fair. So there's statistical ways to do it. There's a lot of other models which I know less, such as Markov chains, such as machine learning algorithms. You can do data-driven attribution. So there's different ways of doing it. But I think, Stephen, last time we spoke, you mentioned something in the medical space, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So Michael, I'm going to need to study the game theory parts of this, and it's on my study plan for next year anyway. Evolutionary game theory is going to be a big part of what I'm studying personally next year. So I'll make sure that Shapley's approach is part of that. But one of the things that I've seen, we've done a lot of work within the healthcare sector. And with HEOR, Health Economics and Outcomes Research, um, kinds of approaches. And I think that the attribution problem has largely been solved in the healthcare space. So there's been a lot of work done over the last 20 years in understanding, you know, things that have multiple causes, like cancer. And I'm a cancer survivor, and one of the things that my oncologists did with me is look at the multiple causes that contributed to my cancer, because that actually understanding the causes helps to understand the cure and the maintenance. And so I think there's an enormous amount that people in the value and pricing world need to learn from health economics and outcomes research, which is its own deep discipline with its own traditions. As part of that, though, there's a gentleman, Judea Pearl, and virtually all of the AIs that we are using today um, rely on early work that was done by Judea Pearl on Bayesian networks, and he got a Turing Award for it. But after that, he went on to say that Bayesian networks and the approach that they bring to AI, that they're just not going to cut it when we need to understand causality. And he's done a lot of work over the last 20 years on causal models and causal diagrams that help us really understand how different things interact uh, to um, to build causal graphs. Then more recently, in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, but really in the last 1 to 3 years, people in the AI world have taken that and developed a discipline around uh, computational or causal ML, causal machine learning. And so just as these generative AI and large language models have transformed how we work, over the next couple of years, I think a lot of the causal machine learning models are going to give us the tools we need to answer these questions in a really compelling way. Um, so that I think is going to be a big topic for Michael and I anyway next year. Uh, and it will flow into the larger pricing and value conversations. But let's go on to the next slide, Liam.
And Stephen, if I just can
Oh,
add something, because
absolutely.
it's a just to show that what we're discussing, I think is going to arrive very quickly, and I think no one is really prepared about that or didn't really think of it because there's so many things to think about. But there's a real example today that happened recently. In 2024, if I'm not mistaken, I think Deezer and Spotify changed the way they actually paid artists. And it's really interesting. So there's a very striking parallel. So I don't remember exactly the way they designed it, but it's a complex model, and they move from market share to an artist-centric way of paying the thing. So I don't know exactly the detail, but it's a mix. So it's a bit of rule-based, but there's some let's say statistics. So maybe they move to something else in the future. But back in the day, let's say you had to have, I don't know, X streams per month and Y unique listeners to actually get paid. Now they actually add some boost depending on what you do. If you're part, for example, of a Deezer curated playlist, I think you're gonna be considered as higher value. If there's more noise, think of it as a thing which is not music or type of content, you get a specific um, weight on how much you get paid by Deezer or Spotify. So essentially, they use it in a way to fight fraud and ensure genuine engagement. They do it to their word to support artists. They want to reduce noise or maybe AI generated music. So long story short, it's a really compelling proof that today this attribution problem is existing and is actually addressed through the vision and mission of a platform, for example. So again, it could go quick. There are parallels in healthcare. There are parallels in the music space. So we're not talking about something concretely crazy that won't exist. It has to exist, and this attribution essentially is going to be the lifeblood of the system, meaning that if you're unable to claim for attribution, you're not going to get paid. As simple as that.
That's a scary thought for a lot of us. So basically, just to paraphrase what Michael just said. Actually, you want to just pop back to the previous slide, Liam? Um, attribution is already a real thing. It's already happening in the consumer space. It's already happening in the healthcare space. As we have more and more agents contributing to outcomes, it's going to be front and center in B2B. And we should start working on solutions now because the tools that we need are out there. We just need to figure out how to combine and apply them. And this, the speed of change is so fast that this, which may sound futuristic in December of 2025, may sound like a pressing and immediate urge in March 2026, and business as usual in September of 2026. So we'll see how fast things move, but it is something that I'm looking forward to collaborating with Michael and other people on to move things forward in this. Let's go. Let's wind up the year though with some thoughts on pricing and packaging themes for 2026. Maybe beyond value models and beyond value attribution. So put together a list here. Happy to have people suggest other things in chat. But what are we going to be talking about in 2026? What are the popular podcasts on impact pricing going to be next year? What are the things that the people building software and the consultants implementing solutions are going to be thinking about? And I'm going to ask Michael to comment on all of these things. Just want to make a quick comment on the first one, though. Will credit-based pricing become the standard? So there is a big divergence of opinion on this. We did a webinar recently with Brandon Hickey, who is the head of monetization for LinkedIn, which was a great webinar. Brandon has a lot of really important insights. And it's his point of view that credit-based pricing models are likely to emerge as the standard for all pricing or for all B2B SaaS and agentic AI pricing in the future. On the other hand, on yesterday's webinar with the head of growth for Lovable, she was of the opinion that this is, that buyers do not like credit-based pricing. They object to it, and they would be much happier with some simpler form of pricing, and that credit-based pricing is just a stopgap that will, because of the current pace of change and innovation and the current uncertainty, and that we will return to more conventional pricing models over the next few years. Two very different futures. Of course, more than one future is possible. But Michael, why don't we start there? Any thoughts on what's going to happen with credit-based pricing? Is this a flash in the pan or is this a real change?
I have a very clear opinion on that. And I'm going to quote Churchill. I think credit is the worst form of monetization except all the other forms. So to keep it very simple, I think it's the best worst or the worst best solution at the moment. I think it helps given where we are at. I think it's going to survive. I don't think it's going to be this. I think the future is going to be multiple coexisting models, and credit is a way targeting specific customers at specific moment of their journeys. I don't think credit is going to be the future. It's going to be one option, and I'm pretty convinced that it's here to stay.
And Jeremy has a comment where I'm just going to read it for people who aren't looking at the chat. This is my experience too. Clients don't like credit-based pricing because it's unclear how much things will actually cost.
Absolutely.
So transparency is critical to the success of credit-based pricing models, and I think a lot of people have flailed in trying to make their credit-based pricing. It's not just transparency, transparent and predictable.
Yep.
And as heavy Lovable users, I have to say that Lovable's pricing, credit-based pricing, was actually a disincentive for us. But I think that they are improving things. I think that they are improving things, and they've got some really interesting things they'll be rolling out in January that will make their credit-based pricing more transparent and predictable. Value IQ uses credit-based pricing, and part of our goal is to make it as transparent and predictable as possible. But transparency is part of this. So let's go on. You know, a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about AI in the pricing process and in the sales process, but I think we've got our focus wrong. And what we really need to be focused on is how is AI changing the buying process, and what does that imply for pricing and transparency? But Michael, can you share some thoughts here?
When I'm looking what's happening, so I know if you guys saw, but I think it was a couple days ago, Microsoft increased their price, justifying AI and cybersecurity. I don't remember, but I think it's like 25 or 30% or even 35% price increase. So that could, by the way, threaten a lot of business cases because it's not a small price increase. So to answer your question about transparency, I think there's going to be a wave of price increase because that's an opinion. Again, I think AI is really cheap, because it's been highly subsidized. So when price increase, then people and of course I'm a big AI believer, as you know, but when price are gonna increase and value may not be able to be demonstrated, that's what's gonna force transparency. So I'm 100% convinced that transparency is gonna be critical. Transparency doesn't mean that you give all your cost. It could be transparency about the value and the process and what you do. So again, we have to define what transparency really means. I'm not really convinced just yet that people would see exactly your cost structure and so on. But we have seen some companies starting to monetize AI as a cost plus with transparency on their own costs. So maybe that makes sense for some part of the AI value chain, let's say the infrastructure, less differentiated part. But I think transparency is here to stay for sure. And it is going to just accelerate. Just to answer just to understand the invoice, by the way.
And that takes us back to your earlier point that value models will help justify invoices, which is something I think we should take away. We're just about at the end here. I'm going to give Liam the last word for the Ibbaka webinar series in 2025.
Yeah, just, thanks so much to everyone who's joined this one, the previous ones, if you joined them all or just one, and definitely to Mike again. I mean, I can't even count how many times now you've joined us, Mike. So we're
75.
we're very appreciative of that. And I really like that those two lines and that one slide, the value model is a living creature. But yeah, everybody, Merry Christmas, 2 weeks from now. Be with your loved ones, stay safe, don't drink and drive, have a D&D, take some time to yourself. Think about, where B2B SaaS has taken us, all these months to now to December in 2025 and, where it's going to take us next year as well. Um, you know, Thanks again, everyone. And we'll be reaching out with the YouTube link and the presentation deck.
Thank you
Thanks so
very much.
much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for participating through the year, and 2026 is going to be an exciting year for us all.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.